Hey everyone, how's it going? I hope you're all doing great and following the 3H's of the channel. In this video, I have a collection of encounters that are just bizarre, and of course, all scary in their own right. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, pull up a stump with me and let's get into it. Thank you for watching. So this is not paranormal, as most would think of as paranormal. I was out at a public hunting range when this happened. We were hunting turkey. I was using my .50 caliber muzzle loader and had a good friend along with me as well. For those not familiar, this muzzle loader packs a huge powder charge that is held in place by a bullet fitted tightly into the barrel. The rifle kicks like a mule and shoots a huge cloud of smoke behind the bullet. I'm not sure if this will make any sense to anyone without a little firearm knowledge, but I'll give it a shot. Before heading into the woods, we loaded our rifles, powder down the barrel, and then I rammed the bullet down the barrel as well. I put a primer in the breech plug, and I set out, ready to shoot. We followed some gobbling, and eventually we came up on a few turkeys. I aimed my rifle. I fired, and nothing happened. In fact, nothing at all, not even a jam. I figured it was bad primer, so I changed it out quickly and I lined up another shot. I pulled the trigger, and again, nothing. I just froze for a second. I was wondering what was going on. The turkeys looked at me, gobbled, and then took off. I checked the barrel, and my powder and bullet were both gone. Stunned, I turned to my friend to ask his opinion on what happened, but then I saw him 50 yards behind me, unconscious on the ground. I had to shake him awake, and he was so confused, disoriented, and had no idea why he was on the ground. My powder and bullet disappeared without so much as a puff of air from 2 primers. My friend seems to have taken a quick nap in the woods for no reason and no recollection of why. We went home and haven't really spoken about that event again. What do you think happened? When I was younger, my family went on a camping trip. We weren't roughing it or anything like that. The campsite had electricity, a pool, and a shop with ice cream. We basically just called it camping because we slept in a tent. On the second day of our little adventure, I woke up in my Superman sleeping bag in the middle of the woods, very thick woods too. Confused, I sat there for hours. My mother always told me that if I was lost, that I should hold still. Eventually, I saw a dim light in the distance. I got up and ran toward it. I was thinking that it was somebody looking for me, but instead, it was a small white cabin with vines growing up the side, and these strange yellow bushes growing out front stood in a small clearing. I knocked on the front door, and I was greeted by a middle-aged man with graying red hair and dirty tan pants. He was stunned that I was there. He ushered me in, making sure that I wasn't hurt. I told him that I was fine, but I had lost my parents. When he asked me what my name was, I realized just how strange things were. For the sake of this, I'll tell you that my name is Alexander. He couldn't pronounce my name at all. The X sound came out as like an I or an E. I repeated my name several times and told him it was the letter X. He told me not to play games. I told him I wasn't. That was my name. He said there was no letter in the English language that sounded like that. I was growing very annoyed, and so was he. I asked where he was from. I told him the city, but he didn't recognize the name. He pulled out a map and asked me to point it out. Years later, in school, we learned about Pangea, and it was only then that I realized that was the map that he gave me. I started crying after minutes of trying to read this map and not understanding any of it. Some letters looked like ours, while others looked like squiggles. He told me not to worry, and that he would take me to the closest town tomorrow. I asked him what his name was, and he said something that I couldn't even try to translate. It almost sounded like a gurgling sound to me. The rest of the night was uneventful. He made me a very bitter tea and asked me about my life, where I went to school, what my parents did for work, and so on. Everything was beginning to seem almost normal after a while. He let me sleep on his bed while he took the couch. I shut my eyes, and all I could feel was the rush of water into my lungs. I kicked my legs and arms frantically. I broke the surface of the pool, freezing cold in the middle of the night. I ran to my campsite crying and jumped into my parents' bed, soaking wet. They hadn't noticed my absence, though I was sure that I was gone for at least a day. They calmed me down and told me to sleep with them that night. I searched every corner of that campsite in the morning. The sleeping bag that I had left out in the woods was nowhere to be seen. I don't know where I went, or what happened to me, or anything, or how I ended up in the pool. Nothing about it makes any sense. I'm going to preface this story by saying that I have no reason to lie. Lying on the internet to me has zero benefits, especially anonymously. What am I going to do? Look cool to strangers? Anywho, a bit of info. It was early April in 2015. I had the weekend to myself, so I decided to go fishing and camping with my dog at a state park in Texas. This was near Houston. I got there on a Friday, and for most part, nothing happened. Nothing unusual, despite me genuinely hoping for some good spooky stuff. The story takes place that Saturday at around 6 p.m. and 3 a.m. on Sunday. I was just loading a few logs into the fire pit, about to get dinner started. And then, what looks like from straight out of the woods, comes just a guy. He's dressed really business casual. Khakis, a short sleeve button-up shirt, loafers, kinda like how you'd imagine a doctor dresses on vacation, kind of. A very plain Jane looking guy. I think the typical picture of a man from the 1950s, and that's what this guy kind of looked like. It was a busy weekend. Every campsite near me was occupied, so I didn't find it too surprising that this dude just popped up. What was weird, though, was my dog, a 19-week-old puppy who's usually friendly as hell to people. At worst, she'll bark once or twice while wagging her tail. Not this time. She went full on, teeth bared, ears back, hackles, the hairs on the back of the neck standing up, tail straight, defense mode. The guy didn't pay any attention to her. After a few seconds of him not interacting at all, I say, "Hey buddy, can I do something for you?" He says, "You should come with me." Chills go down my spine. I reply, sorry man, I was just about to go meet up with someone." I wasn't, but I needed an excuse to get out of that situation without saying that he just creeped me the hell out. I get in my car and I back out. I check the rearview mirror and he's just staring at me the whole time I'm driving away. I come back a few minutes later after buying some meat. The guy's gone, so I started to get dinner on once again. So from here, skip to about 3 a.m. into Sunday. I couldn't sleep, so I went out to get some night fishing done. I was sitting on a dock by a boat ramp. I was facing the water, and my dog begins to growl just like before. It's that guy. The man is standing on the top of the boat ramp. I reach for the knife I brought with me. I say, hey, how's it going?" A few seconds pass, with no response. He just says, "Come with me. You'll be happier where I am," and calls me by name. I jump up and prepare to book it when he just starts calmly walking down the boat ramp. He hits the water and doesn't break his stride. He just walks straight into the lake like it was the sidewalk. Once his head disappears from sight, I start freaking out. I call park security and tell them that I just saw a man walk straight into the water, and their response was odd. Instead of being confused, asking me more questions, they immediately freaked out and said, "Stay calm, return to your campsite immediately." I thought, screw that, I'm gonna hide behind a tree and watch. Just one camp patrol guard eventually shows up. He walks back and forth in front of the boat ramp, mumbling about seeing this before, and then he gets back in his golf cart after about 20 minutes of this. I decide that I've had enough. I pack up the car and I went home at 5 in the morning. I live in Frederick, Maryland, but I frequently hunt in Kemah. I had an experience with what I think is a dog man in that area. It was fall of 2017. My standard loadout was a 30-06, a backpack of provisions, toilet paper, paracord, field dressing knife, hunting knife, and you get the picture. So I started out into the woods, and I decided to head due west. I walked for what must have been 30 minutes before I found this elevated area to set up shop on. I get settled in, and I start watching below, and then I hear something, a sound behind me. I turn around and pull out the revolver, and then I see what looks like a wolf's head bobbing through the trees. Very quickly, I realize that it's either a supernaturally tall wolf or it's walking on two legs. I watch it come into a small clearing, and I see that it is in fact walking on two legs. I decide against taking any kind of shot at the thing. I watch it perk its head up, sniff the air, and then disappear off into the woods. I decide that I'd best get out of there while I could. I got to my truck, and there were prints all over it, and it smelt like wet dog. After this, nothing happened. However, since then, I've bought a new rifle, and if I ever see it again, I intend to bring it down. So I'd like to talk about some experiences that my mom told me about from when she grew up in eastern Kentucky. So if you've ever been up there, you know how absolutely creepy it gets almost immediately. Trees are absolutely everywhere, and buildings and whole towns just look like they've given up and died decades ago. Everything looks dingy as hell, and nights are incredibly dark because there's no streetlights or anything of the sort, and winding up the side of a mountain road that's just barely wide enough for two cars to pass. If one stops dead, it's just dangerous AF. As I've said before, there's tons of graveyards up there. A lot of them are just family owned and forgotten out in the wilderness. My grandmother was buried up there, and it takes a damn good 15-minute trek just to get to her burial site. And so I have this branch of my family that somehow came into an absolute shit ton of money, but they also didn't want to leave their home. So they set up this super huge house way up in the mountains. This was probably back in the 60s if I remember right. My mom told me that it was an amazing place back then. All the rooms were spotless and clean. They had the coolest stuff, and they had a huge outdoor swimming pool. However, by the time I got to see it, of course it was nearly a decrepit mansion. The pool had probably not seen water beyond a rainstorm in decades. Weeds had splintered and cracked the bottom and sides, and the whole thing was just full of trash. And I don't mean to set this up so much, just eastern Kentucky is really nice and all, but it's always creeped me out growing up. I grew up in Lexington, and we'd go back there every so often to visit distant relations and all. I hated every single trip, and I would try to hide behind my Game Boy every chance I got. The creepiest part about the house was just its general enormity. It wasn't necessarily a mansion, but it had tons of rooms, a small second story, and a huge basement. As a preteen going there, I would get kinda creeped out, and I wouldn't be able to look around too much. I was too scared. But there was one room at the end of the hallway that they used for storage. These guys were crazy hoarders, and this room was stockpiled with all sorts of stuff from the past century. I'm sure there's probably stuff in there that's worth tons of money. I've had my own experiences in this house. Lights flickering off and on, things falling down from where they were just sitting comfortably, weird sounds everywhere. And a pro tip is, never ask someone over there if their house is haunted. It more than likely is. There's few places to live, and these are buildings that have seen generations and generations come and go. If it looks haunted, and you think it's haunted, it probably is. So anyways, my mom got to live in this house when she was a teenager. For a while anyways, it was probably the coolest place in town. But at night, she told me it was just like Amityville. Nearly every night would be the sounds of running footsteps down the hallway, knocks on her door. She'd answer, and nobody would be there. They have this huge bathroom with one wall covered in a giant mirror. She said on several occasions that she'd seen a figure standing behind her in that mirror while she'd be taking a bath, and a few times her hair was pulled. At night, she could just make out the dark silhouette of a man standing at the foot of her bed with his back turned to her, just staring into her vanity. She could never work up the courage to look into it herself and see what he was looking at, or worse, if he were glaring at her through it. One night, though, my mom awoke to feel pressure on her feet. She saw something scurry by and hide quickly on the other side of her bed. She sat up to try and make sense of the situation, and when she did, a pair of clawed hands reached up and she saw a pair of gleaming eyes at her side. She jumped and ran out of the entire house, spending the rest of the night in her car. When she tried to talk to anyone about it, they just agree and say that they had also seen things, but they didn't seem to mind. It didn't seem to bother them as much. To them, it just seemed so easily accepted, or better yet, expected. After all, they grew up with stories about skinwalkers, about Indian burial grounds, ghosts wandering around mountain trails, and everything else. When she was younger, she lived in a smaller, dilapidated house on the top of a hill, with the nearest neighbor being miles away. Off to the side was a trail going up into the forest and then into the mountains. One night, she heard a loud thumping and a chorus of chanting outside. She looked out the window and saw a procession of dark shadows walking together up the trail. When she told her brothers, however, they told her, "It's nothing. Stop being such a baby." She was the youngest of the four, but this happened over and over again over the course of a few months, at the same time each night as well. Eventually, she got one of the brothers to see it with her, and they decided to investigate and follow. They waited and waited some more, watching the clock. When the sound started up again, they looked outside and saw a black mass of figures starting their march. When they walked outside, though, the figures had vanished, but the sounds continued to echo through the hills and valleys. She told me that she saw the procession one more time after that, before it just stopped completely. Her best guess is that she thinks it was a ghostly group of Cherokee heading out on the Trail of Tears, or those that refused to leave, or something else entirely. My uncle won't talk about it, and still denies it to this day, even though he was right there and saw everything. So like I said, Eastern Kentucky is really creepy. I'm currently in Western Kentucky, but as I said, all of my mother's family are from the Far East, Jackson, Hazard, that area. I visited some of her cousins about 1994 in Hazard, and they still didn't have running water. There was also a little family cemetery up on the hill. They were Combs. That was super spooky. The kids that lived there told me that they heard and saw all kinds of stuff in those hills. Their mother also told us a story about the house that I was staying in with them, about her mother being very ill, and to comfort her, she would sleep with her at night. She said the night that her mother died, she woke up and saw what she thought to be a small black bear running around the bed. It was silently staring at her mother. She said that she was so scared that she couldn't scream, she couldn't move. All she could do was watch it pace around the bed, watching her mom, paying no attention to her. Eventually, she said she fell asleep, or maybe not fell asleep, but passed out from fear, and when she woke up a little while later, her mother was cold dead. And this one is about the Jackson area of eastern Kentucky. My grandfather always used to tell me this story that his grandfather told him about that area. The story went that he, my great-great-grandfather, was riding his horse home late one evening and came to a part of the path that was always pretty unsettling. The horse never wanted to go through that part of the path. He said that it was a heavily wooded part, with trees making a canopy above for about a quarter mile. He always had to gouge the horse to make it go. Anyway, that evening, the horse was acting even weirder and actually tried to buck him off. He eventually got the horse to go through, and when he did, he said about halfway through the canopy, something dropped down from the trees onto the back of the horse and wrapped its cold, clammy arms around him. He said it squeezed him, and he could feel claws going into his stomach. The horse took off like a bat out of hell, and he fell off, but was able to quickly get up and run for his life. He said he felt like whatever it was chasing him, but he never looked back. He ran into the barn. I always assumed it was his, but I was never really sure, and hid there, literally thinking that his heart was going to burst. He said that he hid until morning, but the thing is, the horse was never found. That story used to absolutely scare the living daylights out of me. The funny thing was, years later, I ended up reading a different account of the same type of attack in a book of Appalachian ghost stories and legends from that area. Really creeped me out. Whether it was true or not, I have no idea, but my grandfather always said that the story was always the same, and no details were ever changed. So as I said, each of those encounters were bizarre and scary in their own right. If any of them stuck out to you, let me know which one it was down in the comments. And if this is your first time watching, maybe you'll like and subscribe, and all that great stuff. And if you would like to support the channel just a little bit further, I have a PayPal and a Patreon and memberships and super thanks and all that great stuff here on YouTube. And there's a new feature I've heard of called a hype feature. So if you have that, I think you can boost videos for free. I don't really know how it works. I haven't heard a lot about it yet. But yeah, if you have that, feel free to do that. And of course, if you have an encounter of your own, you can send it to the email in the description below. And with all of that said, I hope you have a good week. I hope you'll join me on Friday for that video, and then join me again on Sunday. And then we repeat the process. And hopefully you'll become part of the Leaf family, Leaf clan, whatever we call ourselves here. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one. Thank you for pulling up a stump with me. Thank you for watching, and have a good week.